our Eagles and NFL Insider 97.3 ESPN.com, John McMullen, coming into the Ric Flair music. John, have you ever been mistaken for the Nature Boy?
Many, many years ago when I had the flowing blonde mane as well. No, actually, I've not been mistaken for Ric Flair.
Well, it's worth asking. I know some people say there's people who look alikes. But anyway, so, John, getting to the Eagles here, the day that you met with the coordinators today, Frank Reich, Jim Schwartz. We'll start with Jim Schwartz because that was the one everybody was looking forward to, how Jim would handle, and we know Jim can handle, the questions about the defense. What was your overall impression, what Schwartz had to say about the defense's performance today?
Well, I think it was pretty clear he wasn't happy, but Jim has enough experience. He's not going to throw anybody under the bus. The best he could come up with is there has been no sense of urgency over the past couple weeks against the Rams and the Giants, at least early in the game. And obviously that can't continue as you head towards the postseason and, in theory, tougher competition. Although the Rams obviously are a very good team, certainly not the case with the New York Giants. I think there was a certain level of disappointment. There has to be, giving up 500 yards to that team. But Jim is always very consistent and says it's about the W's versus the L's and not about yardage or points or anything of that nature. So he did give the guys credit for the stop at the end. And he mentioned sometimes it's good to get those kinds of games because you're going to be tested in the playoffs. And if you keep blowing people out and you're never in close games, that can affect you.
He was asked also about Ronald Darby and the secondary as a whole, because we saw there were times that Darby, Mills, and a lot of the guys, they were caught out of position at times, John, in that game on Sunday. What did Schwartz attribute it to? Is it technique? Is it fatigue? What did he chalk it up to?
Well, he mentioned the fatigue part of it was self-inflicted. They were out there for, I think, 88 plays, and that's because they couldn't stop the Giants and get off the field. So in a lot of ways, it was sort of reminiscent of a Chip Kelly game for the defense. They were out there so much. It does affect you, but you don't expect that to continue. As far as Darby specifically, he said it was more of a technique issue because, remember, he was out for a very long time. And the Eagles didn't put him right back on the field, partially because of conditioning issues, and they wanted him to get back up to speed. So from that standpoint, Jim says he's fine. He played the entire game, and it's more of a technique issue, and I kind of agree with that. I don't see a player that was gassed or anything of that nature. I just think he had a bad game. And didn't cover that well. And when that happens with all players, not just Ronald Darby, it tends to be a technique issue.
John, when you look at the secondary as a whole, we saw the struggles the past couple of weeks. Now with Patrick Robinson in the concussion protocol and Rasul Douglas was inactive last week, would we pretty much expect him to be active for Monday's game? And what are some other things that the secondary can do, and what Jim Schwartz said about the secondary in terms of what they can do to improve their play over these last 2 weeks so they do not back into the playoffs?
Well, there's a number of issues for Monday night when it comes to playing time, and it starts with the Vikings and Packers on Saturday, because I think if the Vikings lose that game, obviously the Eagles clinch the number one seed in the conference, and things change from that standpoint as far as resting players and things of that nature. And then if the Vikings win, then you have to beat the Raiders. So you're obviously going to play, and you're obviously going to put out your full starting lineup. And when it comes to Patrick Robinson, the fact that they're playing on Christmas night, on Monday night, that gives them an extra day to get through the concussion protocol. So it's still early in the week. My guess is I saw him after the game in the locker room. He didn't look certainly any worse for wear, so I think that extra day is a good indication he's going to be ready. If that's the case, ultimately I think Rasul Douglas is still down and still not dressed because one of the reasons he wasn't dressed in New York is because Brian Brayman's back, and they needed that roster spot for a special teams guy. Well, Brayman was very effective, very helpful on special teams, so he's going to continue to dress if the games are meaningful, and that means Rasul is probably the odd man out. But as I said, if the Vikings lose, then you're going to see Rasul Douglas play a heck of a lot, and he's certainly going to dress.
Sticking with the secondary just real quick, John, the Sidney Jones was obviously eligible to practice now, and he has been. So what's the Eagles' plan right now with him? Are they just looking to get a look from him in practice in order to basically determine if he's going to be good for the division round of the playoffs to maybe be at least on the roster, if not at least dress? I mean, what's the plan with Sidney Jones right now?
No, I think the plan with Sidney Jones is if they sort of had this 21-day period where they can take a look at him and he can practice, and then they have to make the decision to either elevate him or put him on injured reserve and shut him down for the season. Ultimately, I think it's going to be the latter. He's not going to play this season unless there's an injury, a significant injury, over the next 2 weeks and a roster spot opens. But when you have Jalen Mills, he's going to play. Ronald Darby's going to play. Patrick Robinson's going to play. Rasul, as we mentioned, is going to be that fourth corner. So right now there's no spot for him. If someone gets injured and if he shows that he's at least capable of playing in sub packages and getting the conditioning part of it down, then maybe they activate him. But I would say that's a long shot at this point.
Switching over to the offensive side of the football now, Nick Foles obviously played really well against the Giants. And again, it was the Giants, so you kind of take it with a grain of salt. But he went out there and did what he had to do. He beat a bad team. He threw 4 touchdowns. He showed some good things. You know, are they going to continue to stick with Nick Foles and riding out his arm as they did with Carson Wentz for most of the season, or do you expect more now of the running game to find a concrete number one running back like a guy like Jay Ajayi, who is still, I guess, clamoring for maybe that threshold of 15 to 20 carries a game?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's trending towards Ajayi becoming the main guy in the committee. But as far as changing the actual identity of this offense, Doug's been pretty clear. Frank Reich was clear today. They have a lot of confidence in Nick Foles. Nothing's going to change from the way they call a game. And they're very confident in him throwing the football, him spreading the football around. The issue becomes with the unscripted offense, as I've said time and time again. That tends to go away, and that's going to make the margin of error smaller in particular games. But if you're looking for the Eagles to scale things back and become a run-first team and being afraid to throw the football, that's not their identity. They're not going to be that way, and they have a lot of confidence, and they proved it. It wasn't lip service. They sort of the mantra when Carson went down was nothing changes, and at least for 1 week, nothing changed. They called the offense the way they always call the offense.
Talking with John McMullen on 97.3 ESPN.com, Eagles and NFL Insider. You can follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. John's appearance being brought to you by Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit Gino Pinto on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton and online at GinoPinto.com. Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. John, sticking with the offense, you know, Nick Foles hasn't played that much. We didn't see him in the preseason. He's really only been on the field for 1 full game and change. We know that Doug was asked about resting guys the last 2 weeks, but is it really smart to be resting Nick, considering the guy needs as many reps with the first team as possible?
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, and I wrote that on 973ESPN.com. In a weird way, I think the Eagles might be hoping for Minnesota to beat Green Bay and hoping that they need to beat Oakland. because they do need reps for Nick Foles. I mean, you look on the stat sheet, and it's really, really impressive. 4 touchdowns and his ability to spread the football around, which Frank Reich compared to a basketball point guard today. But if you look at the film, there was also hesitation, the double clutching. And believe it or not, he left plays on the field because of what you just said, Josh, and the fact that he hasn't played a lot. And you do have to get into the field and get the speed of the game down. So I do think they need him to play against Oakland. And then week 17, if you clinch the number 1 seed, then I think it becomes sort of like the third preseason game, and you give Nick into the second quarter, maybe even to the half, and then go to Nate Sudfeld. But I don't think you can shut him down by any stretch of the imagination or have him play a quarter against the Raiders. I think he needs the reps.
John, I've been asked a lot of times about who is the backup quarterback. Well, the backup quarterback is Nate Sudfeld. And from what I understand, and you can clarify this for us, is Trey Burton the emergency quarterback for this team? Because we know he did play quarterback in college.
Yeah, I mean, and they have Greg Ward on the practice squad. If they want to go in that direction, elevate him. He was a very good college quarterback at Houston. But, I mean, there's a lot of teams in this league that only go with 2 quarterbacks nowadays and keep one on the practice squad. So ultimately, if you're asking the disaster type scenario, yeah, it's going to be Trey in a game. And if it went into the next week by some strange happenstance, because obviously if Trey Burton's playing quarterback, you're probably not going to win a football game. Right. But then they would have to go on the street and sign somebody else, because he can't go into an NFL football game, obviously, without a guy who's been playing quarterback all year.
And the reason I bring that up, John, is because a lot of people assume, well, you have to have a third quarterback. But as you mentioned, a lot of teams, they don't carry the third quarterback. I know for years, Julian Edelman, for example, he was a college quarterback. He's been considered the emergency quarterback for the Patriots. Hines Ward was a college quarterback. He was an emergency quarterback for the Steelers. So typically teams have a guy on the 53-man who at some point in his life has played quarterback, and he's the emergency guy, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah, there's very few teams that are going to dress 3 quarterbacks. You only get to dress 46 players on game day, so you need those last roster spots for special teams, and they're very important players. The fact that you have to scale your roster back from 53 to 46 on game day. So everybody basically goes into an NFL game with only 2 quarterbacks. It's just a matter of the next week. A lot of teams do carry a third quarterback. Obviously, the Eagles did with Carson Wentz, and one of the reasons they did is because Nate Sudfeld was on the practice squad. Indianapolis tried to sign him. And the Eagles were going to lose him if they didn't offer him the promotion. So that kind of worked out for him, and the fact that they were able to keep Nate in the organization. But it's not rare to go into a game with only 2 quarterbacks.
John, kind of switching a little bit towards the national realm of the NFL now. I mean, since Aaron Rodgers, his season is now done, he was just placed on IR. They're going to roll with Brett Hundley. And the Packers obviously play the Vikings, and this is a big game for the Eagles' playoff implications. Do you now consider this more of an easier victory for the Vikings, and do you kind of expect the Eagles having to play to win in order to get the number 1 seed on Monday night?
Yeah, obviously it's much easier to beat the Packers with Brett Hundley than Aaron Rodgers. And if you think about it from a Viking standpoint, they were the team, Anthony Barr, that knocked Aaron Rodgers out to begin with. So it was a revenge game. If that game was meaningful for Green Bay, if they had won in Carolina, I would have said it was going to be very, very difficult for Minnesota to win that game. Now it trends in the opposite direction. You have one of the best defenses in the NFL going against Brett Hundley, so it looks like Minnesota is going to have a very good chance to win that game. And I said, in a weird way, I think that helps the Eagles, because I think the Eagles, as I mentioned before, do need to get Nick Foles some meaningful reps in a game like Christmas Day against Oakland, where they need the football game to get the number one seed. And ultimately, I think that's the way it happens. And I think the Eagles beat the Raiders. They get the number one seed, and then we talk about Week 17, as I mentioned, turns into sort of a glorified preseason game.
Looking at the entire NFC playoff picture at the moment, obviously it's the Eagles and Vikings. Likely they're going to get the top two seeds. But if you're the Eagles right now, and Josh and I have been discussing this all day for the most part, if you're the Eagles, if you're going to face somebody in the divisional round of the playoffs, you're generally going to get a pretty good quarterback who likely has a lot of playoff experience. Teams like the Saints, Panthers, and Falcons, maybe even the Rams, if they drop down a seed, you obviously get a hot quarterback in Jared Goff. But if you're the Philadelphia Eagles, you're going to be facing a good team no matter what. But if you're gonna have to face somebody, who are you scared of most, and who are you scared of least if you're the Eagles right now?
Well, I would be scared most of Drew Brees, because I think the biggest issue, and I think that, the real answer would have been Aaron Rodgers if the Packers somehow found a way to get in, but obviously that was a big break. I don't think the Eagles can outscore people in a shootout at this point when you're talking about a truly elite quarterback, and that's how it could shape up against a team or a quarterback like Drew Brees. Matt Ryan probably in that same conversation. In a weird way, the Cam Newtons, great player, but they go about things differently, and Carolina's probably not looking to beat you in a shootout. So the quarterbacks I would be most scared of without Carson Wentz on this team are the guys who can get hot and throw for 400 yards and put 30-plus points on the board.
John, a couple other quick notes from around the NFL. I almost lost my mind when I saw this. Jeff Fisher is interested in being an NFL head coach again, which is a joke in and of itself. But what makes the joke even worse is the three teams he's reportedly interested in are the Browns, the Colts, and the Bears. I mean, has he ruined enough young quarterbacks' careers? Does he really need to come back and ruin anybody else's career?
Well, look at it this way. Look at the top three seeds in the NFC right now. Nick Foles is the Eagles quarterback right now.
Case Keenum
is the Vikings quarterback.
Jared
Goff is the Rams quarterback. And they all couldn't play under Jeff Fisher in his offense. I think the most laughable part of that report was the Chicago part of it, because Chicago's in the same situation as the Rams were last year, with a defensive-minded coach that has no clue how to bring along a young quarterback in Mitchell Trubisky, who's very, very raw, similar to Jared Goff. And you're going to fire John Fox to bring in Jeff Fisher after you saw what he did to Jared Goff? That part of it's absurd. But that's, Jeff Fisher's been around this league a very, very long time. He's got a lot of powerful friends in this league. He was on the competition committee. He can get those kind of stories sort of planted and given to favorable reporters. I don't think anybody is going to be knocking down Jeff Fisher's door to be a head coach in this league.
John, I would propose this. If there is an owner who did hire Jeff Fisher, that the NFL should convene and vote to take that owner's power of running a team away from him for at least the duration of Jeff Fisher's tenure as head coach.
Well, I get what you're saying. Jeff is fine defensively. If he learned from his mistakes and sort of got an innovative young offensive line in there and just left him alone, he could probably be a successful coach again. I saw no evidence of that happening with the Rams, obviously. And as I said, the one team, the story history of the Bears, you should shut down that franchise if they hire Jeff Fisher, because they have no idea what they're doing.
John, one more quick note for you before we let you go. We always appreciate your time, folks. You can follow John at JF McMullen on Twitter for all your Eagles and NFL news. So with the conversation that Jerry Richardson is going to be selling the Panthers after this season, a couple of names are floating out there is Sean Combs. He expressed interest on Twitter. Another report says that Eddie DeBartolo, the former 49ers owner, could be in on the bidding. The thing that I brought up earlier today, John, is that Eddie DeBartolo is worth, according to Forbes, $2.8 billion. Sean Combs is only worth $820 million. The NFL is a billion-dollar industry, and Sean Combs may want to own an NFL team, but, John, I want to own a Lamborghini, but I own a Honda Civic instead. So the reality, of a guy buying a team, I just don't see Sean Combs getting the resources together to buy a team. And I'm not sure, though, with Eddie DeBartolo, if the NFL wants him back in the league either.
No, and there'll be, there are about 300 people in this country that have the financial wherewithal to buy an NFL team. I don't think people realize that when they talk about, you mentioned the financial wherewithal. Yeah, you can be rich, but you got to be a different level of rich to buy an NFL team. Now, that said, you only have to put up 30%. So if Sean Combs wanted to go the Derek Jeter route and sort of get a lot of other people's money to buy the team, that's a possibility, but it's very unlikely. I mean, that's an exclusive club, and you got to be really, really, really rich. And not only that, you have to want to be involved because it's so high profile, and you get so much criticism, and it's so easier. I constantly hear people say, NFL prints money. If you're a really, really rich guy that can afford an NFL team, there are far, far easier ways to make more money. And you're not splashed on the front page of the paper every day. So you have to love it. You have to have that financial wherewithal. And there's not a lot of people in this country capable of doing it.
John, before we let you go, I got a dark horse for you, candidate, who's going to want to buy that team. You ready?
Shoot.
Mark Cuban.
Yeah, I mean, Mark's always criticized. Mark's always been one of those guys who criticizes the NFL from afar, but you can kind of tell he's jealous and wants to get involved. Donald Trump was like that back in the day. Vince McMahon is like that. Everybody criticizes the NFL, but they secretly want a team. He's got the money to do it. And we'll see. I mean, I can't say like I said, when you're talking a pool of about 300, 350 people, it's not very big. So if you throw any billionaire out there, it's always a possibility if they like the sport and they want to get involved.
Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen, John McMullen, or 97.3 ESPN.com, Eagles Insider. Check out all of his work at 97.3 ESPN.com, Eagles NFL coverage. John, appreciate the time today, and it's been a pretty nice day outside, so I hope you enjoyed some of the weather.
Sure. It's a beautiful day, and compared to how it has been, and hopefully the Eagles will have a good week of practice and be ready to clinch that number one seed on Christmas Day.
Yeah, watch Christmas Day be like 10 degrees outside.
Football weather, Josh. Football weather.
Right. Thanks, John.
Thanks, guys.